The Texas sun beat down on the dusty lot of Morgan Auto Works, a prestigious but proudly old-school garage on the outskirts of Houston. Inside the cluttered main bay, a 1968 Shelby Mustang sat with its hood wide open, its legendary engine silent, its guts exposed like a patient on an operating table. It had been giving every mechanic on site a headache for weeks. Even Hank Morgan, the gruff and gray-templed owner of the garage, had thrown in the towel. "This thing ain't gonna run again," Hank muttered, tossing a wrench onto the nearby bench. "Too many cooks and not enough brains," he added half-jokingly, glancing at the lineup of grease-stained workers leaning on tool carts and sipping from thermoses. In the corner stood Jerome Baxter, a towering black man in his mid-50s, with calloused hands and deep-set eyes that had seen decades of engine blocks and busted carburetors. Known simply as JB, he was one of the best mechanics in all of Harris County, maybe even Texas. But that didn't always translate into respect, especially not from Hank, who'd never really let go of the old world. What none of them knew was that JB had brought someone with him that day. "Hey, Daddy," came a soft voice from behind. JB turned and smiled. "You made it, Pumpkin." A young girl, no older than 17, stepped into the garage. Her name was Naomi Baxter, and she wore baggy coveralls rolled up at the ankles, oversized work boots, and a pink bandana tied around her voluminous curls. Her skin was a rich, glowing brown, and her eyes sparkled with an intelligence that most folks overlooked because they were too busy judging her by her age or the color of her skin. "She's just here to observe," JB said quickly, catching Hank's narrowing eyes. "Observe?" Hank scoffed. "This ain't a classroom. This is a shop. And that," he pointed at the Shelby, "ain't no toy engine. That's a legendary VE8, and she looks like she's never held a socket wrench in her life." Naomi didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped forward and examined the engine with interest. "This the one with the old Holly 4150 carburetor?" she asked, already identifying its parts by sight. A few of the guys chuckled under their breath. "Yeah," Hank said, raising an eyebrow. "You read that in a book somewhere?" Naomi smiled faintly. "No, sir. I rebuilt one last spring for my AP engineering project." The garage fell silent. JB beamed with pride but didn't speak. He wanted Naomi to own this moment. Hank, unwilling to be shown up, crossed his arms. "Tell you what," he said with a smug grin. "You fix that engine, get it to crank and idle smooth, and I'll pay your old man's salary bonus out of my own pocket." The other workers murmured, some chuckling, some wide-eyed. No one had dared touch that Shelby in days. Naomi looked up at him. "And if I don't, then you wash shop floors for the rest of the summer," Hank said. "Deal?" JB opened his mouth to object, but Naomi beat him to it. "Deal." She set her backpack down, unzipped it, and pulled out a tablet, some custom tools, and a notebook covered in greasy fingerprints. The men around her watched with a mix of disbelief and mild amusement as she stepped up to the engine and got to work. Naomi didn't waste time. She bypassed the faulty ignition module with a hand-soldered capacitor bridge she designed for school, swapped out 2 cracked spark plugs from JB's own set, and removed a piece of insulation that had melted over a sensor wire. Then she stood back, wiped her hands, and nodded. "Try it now," she said. One of the mechanics turned the key in the ignition. The garage held its breath. The Shelby sputtered once, twice, and then roared to life, purring with a low, sweet growl that made everyone turn their heads. "Holy," one of the guys whispered. Hank's face turned crimson. He looked like he'd swallowed a crow. "Must have been luck," he mumbled. Naomi raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "Where'd you learn that trick with the capacitor bridge?" another mechanic asked. Naomi shrugged. "Built it myself. It's based on a design I made for NASA's Mars rover project. They gave us a grant to try it on low-voltage systems." Hank blinked. "NASA?" JB finally stepped in, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Naomi's been working with the Youth Science Initiative for 3 years now. She just got a letter from MIT. Dead silence. "She's going to MIT?" someone finally whispered. Naomi looked directly at Hank. "So, about my dad's bonus?" The garage erupted in laughter, applause, and awe. But for Hank, it was more than just a dare gone wrong. It was a moment of reckoning, A painful realization that the world was changing, and he'd just been schooled by the next generation. And Naomi wasn't done yet. The Shelby's engine still echoed in the minds of every man in that shop, even after it had been turned off and rolled back into its bay like a trophy. Some still hadn't moved from where they'd been standing. Hank Morgan, red-faced and rattled, stared silently at the girl who had just upended everything he thought he knew. Naomi Baxter calmly packed her tools back into her backpack, not a speck of grease on her coveralls. The room buzzed with whispers. MIT? She built that capacitor herself? How the hell did JB keep that a secret? Questions circled, but Naomi wasn't here for applause. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She'd come to spend time with her dad, and maybe, just maybe, remind the world that brilliance doesn't need permission to shine. "Hey, kid," called one of the younger mechanics, a red-haired guy named Kyle. "How'd you know it was the sensor wire? We checked that 3 times. Naomi slung her backpack over her shoulder. "You checked the wire. You didn't check the temperature shielding. That old fiberglass had melted and was grounding the signal intermittently. A thermal ghost glitch." Hank squinted. "A what now?" JB chuckled. "Means the heat messed with it in ways your scan tools couldn't see." Hank rubbed his forehead. "You trying to tell me this whole thing was about a melted wrapper?" Naomi's tone was respectful, but firm. "No, sir. I'm telling you the car wasn't the only thing overheating." The garage went quiet again. JB tried to hide his smile. Hank scowled, but there was something else behind his eyes now, a crack in his pride. "All right," he finally muttered. "Kid's got a brain, I'll say that." Naomi nodded. "Thank you." But then Hank did something unexpected. He reached into his back pocket, pulled out a thick envelope, and tossed it onto the tool bench beside JB. "That's your bonus," he said gruffly, avoiding eye contact. "Fair is fair." JB picked it up slowly, his expression unreadable. "Didn't think you'd follow through." "Yeah, well, a lot of things I didn't think would happen today." Naomi started walking toward the door with her father, but she paused. "Mr. Morgan, can I ask you something?" Hank looked up. "If I were a white boy in a baseball cap instead of a black girl with a braid, would you have dared me?" The silence that followed was heavier than before. Even the engine seemed to hum quieter in the background. Hank didn't answer. Naomi nodded, not needing one. "That's what I thought." As she and JB stepped outside, the air hit differently, freer, cleaner. JB glanced over at his daughter. "You all right?" Naomi smiled. "Yeah, but that wasn't about fixing an engine." He raised an eyebrow. "That was about proving a point," she said. JB stopped walking. "You sure that's what you came here to do?" Naomi looked up at the sky. "I didn't come here for a fight, Daddy. I came here to watch you work. But sometimes, when someone underestimates you enough times, you stop letting them get away with it." JB sighed, then reached into his own coveralls and handed her a folded paper. "What's this?" "Letter came this morning. Thought you should open it after showing a whole garage full of grown men how it's done." Naomi unfolded the paper, her eyes scanning fast. "Dear Ms. Naomi Baxter," it read, "we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as one of 5 national finalists for the Athena Initiative's Young Innovators Fellowship." Naomi's lips parted in awe. "This is full-ride material," she whispered. "More than that," JB said. "It's you, making your own lane." From behind them, Kyle called out, "Naomi, if you ever want to come back and show me how to run a voltage balance test, I'd love to learn." Naomi turned and gave him a polite smile. "Sure, but I charge hourly." The crew burst out laughing. Even Hank cracked a grin. As Naomi and JB walked to the truck, her eyes settled on the rising sun. She had just fixed the unfixable. But what she really rebuilt was something far more powerful: respect. Not just for her, but for every girl, every outsider, every underestimated genius waiting to be seen. Naomi Baxter sat on the front porch of her family's modest home later that evening, the paper from the Athena Initiative still clutched in her hands. The words danced in her mind. National finalist, fellowship, leadership in STEM. She'd spent years tinkering beside her father, building bridges between curiosity and action. But today felt different, like she had crossed a line into a world she had only dared to imagine. JB stepped outside with 2 mugs of tea, handing her one. The porch lights buzzed faintly, the Texas crickets singing into the night. Crazy day, he said, sitting beside her. Naomi nodded. Yeah, I'm still kind of processing it. JB looked out at the stars. You weren't just fixing a car today, baby girl. You were correcting history. Some people don't know how to see greatness in places it doesn't usually come from. And you made them see. Naomi sipped her tea, her voice quiet. I didn't expect him to pay the bonus. I thought he'd find a way out of it. He almost did, JB chuckled. But truth has a way of silencing even the loudest mouths. She smiled at that. The next morning, something unusual happened. At precisely 10 a.m., a sleek black SUV pulled into the lot of Morgan Auto Works. Out stepped a sharply dressed black woman in a charcoal pantsuit, heels clicking against the pavement. She moved with calm authority and walked straight toward Hank Morgan, who was working beneath a truck. You Mr. Morgan? She asked. He slid out from under the truck and blinked at the woman. Yeah, who's asking? She handed him a card. It read, Dr. Valerie Nash, Director, National STEM Equity Board. I heard about the Shelby Mustang, she said, and about the girl who fixed it. Hank looked stunned. News travels that fast? Faster when it breaks ceiling, she replied. I want to meet her. Within minutes, JB and Naomi arrived at the shop. Naomi looked at the woman with curiosity. Naomi Baxter, Valerie said with a warm smile, extending her hand. You just gave our team something we haven't seen in a long time. Hope, Naomi blushed. It was just an engine. No, sweetheart, Dr. Nash said. It was a message. She turned to Hank. Do you realize what you've got here? Do you know how rare it is to find a 17-year-old girl who can outthink, outbuild, and outclass professionals? Especially one who never had the doors open for her? Hank, for once, stayed quiet. We're launching a nationwide mentorship tour. Young innovators visiting schools that don't have labs, don't have equipment, don't have opportunity. We'd like Naomi to be the face of it. JB's eyes widened. You're serious? Dr. Nash smiled. Dead serious. We need her voice and her courage. Naomi's voice was barely a whisper. I've never even given a speech. Then it's time to start writing one, she said. The days that followed felt like a dream. Media outlets showed up at the shop. Local news crews interviewed Naomi. A photo of her beside the revived Shelby Mustang went viral. MIT confirmed her full scholarship. Schools across the state invited her to speak. Teachers started using her name in classrooms as an example of what's possible. But something else happened too. Morgan Auto Works changed. The mechanics, once skeptical and dismissive, began welcoming interns from nearby black high schools. Hank, humbled by his experience, started a paid apprenticeship program and renamed one of the bays the Naomi Station, where students could learn under JB's mentorship. A mural went up, Naomi in her pink bandana, holding a wrench like a torch. And every time she walked into that garage, the workers didn't see the mechanic's daughter. They saw the girl who changed everything. On the day Naomi stood on the stage in front of her first crowd of high school girls, many of them black and brown and quiet like she once was, she took a deep breath. You don't have to wait for permission to be brilliant, she said. You don't need the world to believe in you before you do. All you need is a challenge and a reason to rise. Her voice shook a little at first, but it got stronger with every word, just like she had. And in the front row, JB sat with tears in his eyes, not because she'd made it, but because she never stopped being his little girl who once fixed her toy truck's wheels when she was 5, just to make it run smoother. She was always going to change the world. Now the world finally knew it too.